Hello. Today's date is November 20th, 2017. My name is Laura Cleary, and I'm a graduate student at Salem State University History Department. I have the great pleasure of being joined today by Helen Shaw. She's a descendant of Rebecca Town Nurse and Mary Town Esty. We're here today as part of the Salem Witch Trials Descendant Oral History Project. Helen, can you tell me about your family when you were growing up?
Well, my dad worked for Bendix originally, and then into other things, but he's an electrical engineer, so we traveled quite a bit. I went to, in my first 6 years of school, I think I was in 8 different schools. And then we moved to Massachusetts, so that was the first time I'd lived in one spot for more than 2 or 3 years. And I graduated from Leominster High School. I'm the oldest of 3 children. I have a younger sister, Barbara, and a brother, John, who's 13 years younger than me. And my parents are both deceased. We lived all over the east of the Mississippi, in just about any state you want to talk about. I went to undergraduate school at Ohio State University, majoring in anthropology. I was there for the riots, and everybody remembers they shot 6 students at Kent State, but they missed the fact that we also had wounded at Ohio State. We were closed down for a week. I was married in 1972 when I graduated from Ohio State, and my husband was accepted at University of Michigan, and I went with him. I worked for the university and then went to graduate school there part-time while I worked full-time. And my father, I got interested in genealogy as an anthropologist, looking at social interactions and communities and so on. And my father had his grandfather's scrapbook from after the Civil War. He put it together, and the family Bible. So family history was always in there, and I became very much more interested in it. My first husband's father was bragging about some of his famous ancestors. And so I said, well, I can do better than that. And so I started looking at mine, and that was basically when it got started, looking at the family Bible and then tracking those people and going back to Ohio, where they were from. I got divorced. Then a friend in Chicago who used to live at University of Michigan was at the university, and the place where I worked, Center for Human Growth and Development, invited me to Chicago, introduced me to a friend of hers. We got married and lived in Chicago for 24, 25 years. When my husband's a native of Maine, 300 years in Maine. And so when he was ready to retire early, he wanted to come back to Maine. I wanted to come back to Vermont, which is where some of my family was from. But we settled on Maine. Excuse me. We have 2 boys. The oldest is 32, and the youngest one just got married 6 weeks ago. He's 28.
So how old were you when your father was sharing these items with you?
I was in high school. I was very interested in history in high school. The town, Leominster, used to have a hobby fair show, and a friend and I from high school did one on the Civil War. We had the book and the big scrapbook and things like that, and showed them and did all sorts of things. I didn't find out about Rebecca Nurse until the 1990s. I had written 3 sketches for Vermont families in 1791. And I won't say on TV what the editor was eccentric. And he had done some additional research, which I didn't know about. I did not see the final draft of the article until the book was published. And a distant cousin called me from California and said, oh, have you looked at the, and she was talking about the article, and she said, oh, and we're hooked in with the Town family. And I mean, what are you talking about? So I hadn't even bought the book. I hadn't seen it. I had received nothing saying that the book had been published. I got a hold of a copy of it, looked it up, and it talked about Susanna Russell, who is the young lady here.
Okay.
And she married David Johnson, who was, anyway, it gets all convoluted. So anyway, I started looking at her, and it referenced the Russell genealogy, which had just come out. And I pulled it, got a copy at the Newberry Library in Chicago, and lo and behold, it went back to Rebecca Town Nurse. And at that point, it took a little while because my sons were still fairly young and I was working full time. So I put my genealogy on the back burner for a while, but my sister said, oh, the Town family is having a reunion in Salem. We should go to that. So I went with her, and when I had looked at the Russells, I had come up with Mary Esty, but I didn't know who she was. Mm-hmm. Actually, it was one of the other Esties in here. Hannah. And I didn't know who Hannah was. I knew she was Susanna's mother, but I didn't know who she was. And I ran into Karen Johnson, who is with the Town family. She's currently the vice president, I think, of the association. And she pulled out her laptop and typed it in and everything. She says, oh, you're related to Mary as well. So I had two. And as near as we've been able to figure out, based on who all has joined the Town Family Association, the only way you can be related to both Rebecca and Mary is through the Russells.
Okay.
Now, there might be some other duplicates, but there's several cousin marriages in there, and that's the only way you can do it.
So it sounds like your sister is very interested in genealogy as well. You have a kindred spirit there.
It took a while, about 15 or 20 years of, hey, Barbara, but she's now very, very interested, and she is fabulous with computers. She can find just about anything buried anywhere on a computer, and she's broken down some very old brick walls that I've spent 15, 20 years looking at.
Now, did your father tell stories about the people in the books, in the scrapbook, in the Bible, or did he really just have the names?
He had the names. He talked about his grandfather because he knew him. His grandfather didn't die until 1927, I think it was. My father was born in 1919. So he knew him. He knew his father's brothers and sisters. And actually, I had met several of them. When my sister was born in 1954, I think it was the following summer, my dad took me out to visit one of his uncles in Nebraska. What's the capital of Nebraska?
Is it Omaha? I'm not sure.
Yes, right out there, outside Omaha. And then when I think it was about 1960, 61, we went to Wyoming to visit his father's older sister, Sadie, Sarah Elizabeth Hall. And she was one of the first women in the Wind River Valley out there in the early 1900s. Her husband was a federal forest, I don't know what they call them, forest rangers. He managed federal land out there. And at that point, we got her husband's 1894 Winchester rifle. So bits and pieces have come down. My grandmother, who didn't die until 1963, had a few things, but she had given a lot of stuff away. But my dad really, he talked about the Civil War. In fact, he was rather upset with me because a lot of my interest was in the Confederates. I always liked the losers. And so his grandfather had been wounded in North Carolina and eventually lost his arm. His arm had to be amputated. So he was quite upset that I was studying Confederates instead
of the North.
Instead of the North. But
now, do you remember when you first, heard of or learned of the Salem witch trials?
in high school, we did the Crucible as one of our You know,
Okay.
I think it's sort of standard in Massachusetts high schools that you have to study the Crucible, at least back then. And I don't remember my reaction to it. Of course, I didn't know I was related to Rebecca. It was just a story, you know, a very sad story, a very upsetting story. But I didn't really start reading about it. I mean, we came down here. We lived in Leominster, so we did come down to Salem at some point, I think. Went to the House of Seven Gables, that sort of thing, but there was no connection.
You mentioned studying anthropology. Did you do a career
No.
that was
Well,
related to that at all?
They would call it that now. When I was in grad school, there was physical anthropology, cultural anthropology, of which archaeology was part and paleontology were part of cultural or physical, and linguistics was part of cultural. These days, there are so many different kinds. So what I felt I didn't use my degree, but they're calling it applied anthropology now. So I did, when I was at University of Michigan, I was a research assistant to a professor, and we did a large study on physical growth of children, infants and children, followed the mothers during pregnancy, and then the kids up to age 7, I think it was. When I moved to Chicago, well, I spent a year at NIH. But the funding got cut. The idea was, since our funding got cut at the university, I would go to NIH and get into a job down there and continue, get a PhD, that sort of thing. The funding got cut down there too. So that was the point at which I got married, moved to Chicago. I worked for the University of Illinois at Chicago for a while, again as a senior research assistant. Senior research specialist in health sciences is what they called it. That was more epidemiology research. We were looking at Alzheimer's disease. I did a year of, we tracked people who were addicts, drunks, and had been prosecuted for street crimes. With the Rand University in UCLA, Rand was the group was doing it. And we were tracking, it was called TASK, Treatment Alternative for Street Crimes. But in Chicago, to be politically correct, they called it Treatment Alternatives for Special Clients. They were still drug addicts and drunks, but so I like to shock people. I want a really interesting conversation point. I say I've been in more prisons in Illinois than some criminals, including several high security prisons, because we would have to go. Most of these people acted out again after they were supposed. They either didn't go to treatment or they flunked out of it and ended up committing more crimes. So we would have to go to the prisons to do the 2-year follow-up on these guys.
You must have had some experiences there.
It was interesting, yeah. The most interesting probably was at the high security prison at Chicago, Cook County, and the old building, not the nice brand new one. And they took me down to the library and set me up in the corner. And I'm getting the chairs and everything, getting ready to do the interview. And this young kid comes up and says, "Oh, are you an attorney?" I said, "No, I'm here to do an interview." "Oh," he says, "Shoot." So he walks off, and then my client comes in, and he looks over at this kid, and he looks at me, and he says, he said, "Why were you talking to him?" And I explained. He said, "You know, he's in for 2 murders." And there's a pipe running up the wall, and there's always this banging on it. And I'm like, "What's going on?" He says, they're signaling back and forth. And I said, "What are they saying?" He said, "I can't tell you that because they get mad if they found out I told you what the code was." So that was...
So is this why you changed to professional genealogy, or was there another reason?
There was another reason. My last job was, again, another research job. We were interviewing people, and my boss was a brand new PhD. I had more research experience than her. I had more grant experience than her. I had a longer publication list in more prestigious journals than her. She was extremely controlling and insecure. And then she hired another person who had even more experience than I did. And she's trying to direct the two of us. And we both just washed our hands of her and walked out. It was not great. So I didn't have to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I started taking clients in Chicago. Then I went on later, after we moved here to Maine, and got my certifications. I'm one of 3 board-certified genealogists in the state of Maine.
So what inspired you to do the BCG certification?
I hadn't finished a PhD, and I wanted an end.
You wanted some letters?
I wanted some letters after my name. I did try, actually, I did apply to the Department of Sociology at the University of Illinois at Chicago, ran into the same problem. I talked to one of the counselors after it was rejected, and he said, the problem is they felt they couldn't teach you anything. I had more research experience than them.
Mm-hmm.
I had more grant experience than them. I had a longer publication list than them. And yet I had lined up all these professors that were willing to take me on to be my committee to do an epidemiology, sociology program. But
Have you found the certification valuable?
yeah, to some extent, yes. Yeah, it opens up a larger network of people.
Mm-hmm.
Not all genealogists are certified. Not all very famous, well-known genealogists are certified. But it gives you a different type of recognition.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Now, you mentioned earlier the Vermont Families Project,
Yeah.
that was, how you found out about your town family connection. Can you talk a little bit more about that, what you, how you got involved with it and what you were actually doing?
I have several families that moved to Dover, Vermont. I had done a transcript of the warnings out for the town, and that had been published. And I think it was at that point I saw in the Vermont Genealogist Journal the note that they were going to be doing a Vermont in 1791. This is several of the New England states have done it. Maine has the Maine families in 1790, 1790 being the first census of the United States. Vermont, of course, did not have a 1790 census. It has 1791 because it did not become a state until then. Then I think Massachusetts has a few, or they're doing one for Western Massachusetts right now. So it was an interesting project, and I had done a huge amount of research on my Vermont families in Dover. I had published a couple of articles about it, and so I said, okay, these are my families there were 3 that were listed in the census, and I sent them in to the editor, and he said, fine, that works, this is what we want, and then he kept changing. It seemed every time I would change it to what he wanted in terms of format, the way he wanted the references, the way he wanted things set up, he would change it again, and it just was extremely frustrating. But that came out again, I think it was 1993, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
It's a 2-volume set.
No, it's only, well, I have volume 2 is the one that mine is in. I think, yes, there's a volume 1, which I've never seen, and they have not moved on to do other volumes.
Okay.
And that may be because of his eccentric personality.
So it sounds like you didn't have any idea that, you had ancestors connected with the Salem trials until you did that project.
Right.
What was your reaction when you discovered you did?
I thought it was really neat. It's like, wow, okay. Now I've beaten my first husband in terms of famous ancestors.
Did you look to do more research then about them?
I've read Nissenbaum?
Foyer and Nissenbaum, perhaps?
Yeah, I've read that. I tend to buy Salem witchcraft books, but I haven't gotten around to reading all of them. I'm reading A Storm of Witchcraft.
By Dr. Baker. He's a professor here.
Yeah, Yeah, I've got that one. I have several others. I think somewhere in my pile I've got the transcripts of the trial, but I haven't read them.
So how did you feel when you realized that you had ancestors who had been kind of unjustly executed?
Well, it's history. You sort of wonder why, what led to all of this weirdness that was going on. I saw Seven Sovereigns for Sarah, or whatever, Three Sovereigns for Sarah, the one about the movie. I saw that. It's just, you have to wonder why. I mean, Rebecca was 72.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. You hear more about Rebecca. You don't hear that much about Mary.
Right.
And I haven't quite figured that one out yet. I'm going to have to dig a little bit more on that one.
Do you have thoughts on what the causes were? Why the?
Only what I've read in is it Nissenbaum or Nessenbaum?
Boyer and Nissenbaum, I
Yeah,
believe
him.
it is.
And Professor Baker, in that it seems to be the land issues, the back and forth, and the discussions with was it Paris?
Samuel Paris.
Samuel Paris, the minister. And you sort of have to wonder, too, how much of it was these girls reacting to the tension around them and acting out and seeing, I don't think, clues that, so-and-so isn't a nice person, you need to attack her, or something like that. But, they were out after their 5 minutes of fame. That's, Daddy doesn't like that person, so if we accuse him of being a witch, you have to wonder how much of it is that, because you read through their reactions when the men and women were brought in, and then they start screaming and they start, and then and then how much were they encouraged, however subtly, by their elders. There just seems to have been a lot of turmoil going on.
What did you think about the way Rebecca Nurse and Mary Estey, handled their trials there during the trial?
Well, as I said, I haven't seen that much about Mary, so I'm not quite sure. But Rebecca seemed to be so very strong, even though I think she was not in good health to start with, from what I've been able to tell. She stayed her path. I mean, I'm not a witch, I'm innocent, I'm a good Christian, I'm a good townsperson. She's a remarkable woman.
Did you have any other ancestors who were in Salem at the time, who were involved in the trials at all, or just in the area?
No.
It was just that family?
No, most of my family in the late 1600s were further south, Woburn, Connecticut, in that area.
Okay.
Just the towns up here. My husband also has a lot of family members in Rowley, Ipswich, and all of that from that time period. So.
Has your feelings about, or your thoughts about what caused it and the trial itself changed over time as you've, read more?
Not really, no. It's given me some other ideas. As I said, my initial thought was, oh, these crazy girls, they're just trying to, show off. But as I said, when I read the Salem Possessed, and I'm now reading Professor Baker's book, the whole issue of understanding why, the whole community, and that's what I find interesting as an anthropologist, is looking at what's going on and what the reactions are between the various groups, and yet we don't. All we have to base it on is paper. We haven't seen them. It's not like going off to Tahiti or something and looking at them, following the natives. We can only interpret through our perceptions what we're seeing on the papers in the trial transcripts. So.
Very true, very true. What do you think are some of the lasting lessons of the trials?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think, of course, The Crucible was written in response to McCarthy and the the witch trials that were going on there, the witch hunts. And I don't think we've learned anything, because you see it even now. Earlier this year, it was everybody's a white supremacist, everybody's a terrorist, everybody was being accused of things. Nobody was listening to what people were saying or what they were doing. They were just reacting. And you see it now to some extent with everybody's a pedophile, everybody's a molester. It's just, a lot of it's true, but it's like everybody's jumping on the wagon, and you need to slow down, back off, and think. Yeah, it just seems we haven't learned. We're still doing witch hunts.
Do you think we could do more to educate young people from the lessons?
I don't know. I didn't go into teaching, so I don't know. I did get a survey form from both Ohio State University and University of Michigan. They were doing surveys of their alumni to see how, the primary question was, how did your time here as a student help you, in accepting the world, being a member of the world at large. I found them to be very touchy-feely. Not at all what I took from, I was at the university to learn. I wanted to learn anthropology, I wanted to learn genetics, I wanted to learn history. I wasn't there to learn not how to get along with other people from other places, but it's hard to explain. My purpose was to learn, everybody's different, we all have to get along, but it just seemed to be, the survey seemed to be like very touchy-feely. And I don't think current students, I hear about, they have safe rooms because somebody hurt their feelings. You go to the university to learn different things, how to have a disagreement politely, to argue your side and listen to the other person's side, not to go hide in a room because somebody hurt your feelings. I'm sorry, that's not what the university is for.
Have you visited the Rebecca Nurse House or any
Yes.
of the memorials that are Danvers or Salem?
Until they keep forgetting to send me renewal notices for the Danvers Alarm Company. But yes, I was a member for a number of times. I've been there several times. I've been down to the grave a couple of times. The town family reunion has been here in town several times, and we've gone to the benches, which I guess are that way.
Yes, they're downtown.
Downtown.
Pretty much right in the middle.
Right. I've seen the Bewitched statue. Doesn't bother me. I used to watch the show.
Do you think that those memorials honor your ancestor?
Yes.
Are there other ways you'd like to see your ancestors memorialized?
Well, I haven't been to Proctor's Ledge yet. I have been to I don't know exactly where it is. There's the large stone. I think it's where the jail used to be. I'm not sure what it is. I've been there, but I've not been to Proctor's Ledge yet. In fact, we probably should have come down this morning and gone there. We did.
Well, you have another reason to come
Yes.
down, right?
Yeah, we did. I did donate money to help preserve that. I'm glad that they found it. I would like to go there sometime.
Did discovering your connection to these ladies change your sense of self, your sense of family at all?
I'm not sure. I think what they taught me is that you can be strong. You need to stand up for yourself. You are you, and whatever you believe, you should stand up for it.
Do you think you'd feel differently about things if you were descended from one of the accusers or one of the judges?
I'm having dinner with one of the accuser's descendants this afternoon. David Putnam is a good friend of mine. he hasn't told me exactly which Putnam line he is, but so we have a joke that, your ancestors persecuted my ancestors. Well, there are, I think, and you might want to check with some of the town family officials. I think some of the members of the town family associated are descended from both. I think.
Yes, I wouldn't be surprised
Yeah.
based on, there was only a finite number of families, and right, it was pretty early on.
Right.
Yeah.
And as I said, my husband's family originally is from Ipswich and Rowley and Newbury and all of those.
Mm-hmm.
And he's actually related to one of the town family members. I haven't been able to get a hold of Bill and figure out how they're related. But yeah, there's so much intermarriage. I mean, I've got 2 cousin marriages just in my line. So I do know people from other states. Connecticut had some witch trials too.
Yes.
And one of my friends is descended from one of the judges. And I have friends in my genealogy group who are descended from the judges, and of course who are descended from other witches, not necessarily the town family.
If Rebecca Nurse were here, what would you like to say to her or ask her?
Oh dear. I think I'd just like to hug her and give her a big kiss.
Yes. She was certainly very brave.
Yes.
Are there other ancestors in your family tree that have inspired you, that feel special to you?
John Howland. I went to Genealogy Roadshow with Maine Genealogy. I'm currently president, outgoing president of Maine Genealogical Society. And so 2 of us went down to represent the society. And they had an actor who was portraying the captain of the Mayflower. And so, of course, I said, oh, my ancestor, John Howland. And he said, he was off, he went off on this rant about how he told his sailors to just let him go overboard because he was, the captain was responsible for them and they shouldn't be responsible.
Was he the one that went over the side of the ship and got
Yes.
pulled back up?
Yes.
Okay.
So it was so funny. But, he was an indentured servant and he eventually he wasn't rich, but he was well established and had a good family and I hope he learned how to swim.
Hopefully, I don't think many of them did.
No.
Any others?
Well, my great grandfather went through the Civil War.
Is he the gentleman who lost the arm?
Yes.
What did he do afterwards?
Well, he was a photographer, interestingly enough. And my sister actually talked to somebody who worked with the old photograph, cameras where you have got
Yes.
the whole bit. And she said, how would he have done that? Because he was wounded in the shoulder and he had not that much control. But he went out west and homesteaded in Nebraska. He had two photo shops, studios in Ohio. He did photography out there as well. And this person who worked with the antique cameras said that, yeah, it's possible that he could very well have done that with the limited use he had of his right hand. So he was, and his father, my great-great-grandfather, was in the 2nd U.S. Infantry. He went and enlisted when he was 23 or 24, something like that, and served. So he went at age 50. He was over age 50. He enlisted in the Civil War in a regiment. He only lasted about 6 months because of, he just couldn't handle it. But he went in as a sergeant, and I assume because he had the experience of being a private for 3 years in the 2nd U.S. Infantry, that's why they took him in as a sergeant. And I would assume he's the one that trained all of, the new people without any military experience. And to do that at 50 plus.
Sure. Hard work.
Yeah.
Is there anything you wished I asked you that I didn't?
No, can't think of anything. I just wish I knew more about Mary. I'm going to have to do some more research about Mary and find out more about her. But
I think you'll find she's a very interesting woman as
Yeah.
well, very
Yeah.
strong. Well, I really appreciate
Okay,
your time.
thank you.
Thank you very much,
No,
Helen.
you're welcome. Thank you. So, all of, the new people without any military experience, and to do that at 50 plus.
Sure. Hard work.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there anything you wished I asked you that I didn't?
No, can't think of anything. I just wish I knew more about Mary. I'm going to have to do some more research about Mary and find out more about her, but
I think you'll find she's a very interesting woman as
Yeah.
well, very
Yeah.
strong. Well, I really appreciate
Okay,
your time.
thank you.
Thank you very much,
no,
Helen.
you're welcome. Thank you. So.